Steve Siegel. I almost messed it up. Oh, we
Yeah, we
just
just
talked
talked
about
about
this
that,
and
Scott.
laughed about it. My mistake. Steve Siegel, great to have you on the show. East Coast law enforcement brother. You transitioned to the private sector, and you now have your own kind of business doing this too, where you talk people through transition, you help them with transition. But let's talk about your transition first. You came from an interesting on the investigation side of transition and transition in the private sector. So tell us what helped you, what hurt you, what lessons did you learn, what kind of knowledge can you impart on us and folks who are in transition as well or considering transition?
Absolutely, Scott, and thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. So I concluded a 25-year career in criminal investigations working for a prosecutor's office here in New Jersey, which is similar to district attorney's office elsewhere. And I performed a variety of different investigations, a lot of which was white-collar crime, fraud, corruption, financial crimes. Also did dabble into the traditional organized crime investigations, narcotics investigations, bias crime, the high-tech crime unit, and I worked my way up to detective captain before retiring in 2010. Transition was something that always was on my mind from as early as I can remember. I'm always kind of thinking. I'm very analytical in terms of what's going to come down the road. And, I had thoughts of that early in my career. What did I want to do post law enforcement, not knowing when that would have come. I was always passionate about white-collar crime and helping victims of white-collar crime and putting the people who perpetrated those crimes away. So once, and I learned quickly that white-collar crime was an area that most other detectives didn't want to work. It was not very glamorous. It was a lot of paperwork. It was boring. It wasn't, the high-profile stuff. Exactly. While the guys in homicide, narcotics, organized crime are doing, more dramatic and exciting things. But that was good for me because wanting to be there allowed me to stay there pretty much for as long as I want. And I quickly realized that one of the things I would pursue probably after law enforcement is a similar career in the corporate sector doing fraud investigations. So having that white-collar crime experience was the very best that I could have under my belt. And so I made the most of that. And also started to think about things like, certifications and things that would help me both on the job and both afterwards. So I became a certified fraud examiner through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners to have those few letters after my name, which is certainly something that, helps me in my role in law enforcement, but it was also one of the things that was one of the desired designations to have if you were going to operate in the corporate world doing fraud investigations. I actually went back to school. I had a degree in criminal justice when I saw the need to have to work my way around a set of books at times. So I went and took some accounting credits and assembled that into a management degree with an accounting specialization, knowing once again it would help me on the job and also help me after the job. So one of the key things I always believe is getting in the mind, starting to think about early as you can in your career about what might follow and what you need to do to bridge the gap between what it takes to work in the government sector and the private sector. And certainly education and knowledge and experience was very helpful, though, and there's much more that we can discuss about as well.
Yeah, and so I love the fact that you saw CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, as kind of that bridge that was definitely good to have as a law enforcement investigator, and it bridges well into the private sector. Did you know anybody in the private sector at that time who was maybe a CFE and was doing fraud investigations or something similar to what you did in the government sector?
Well, yeah, and in fact, when you're, one of my pet peeves with any kind of investigative work is having sources of information, having contacts, having a network that you can call upon to help you in your investigations. So I relied heavily on net contacts in the financial industry and banks and insurance companies and other companies to do my investigations, to get information where I could from those sources of information, and then realized the value that they had potentially later on to help me segue into a career in corporate investigations. So networking is always something that I really highly tout, both to help you on the job, as an investigator, a law enforcement officer, and certainly when it comes to looking for a job and seeking transition into the corporate world, having that. And I'm not talking about, and I'm dating myself when I say, a Rolodex full of business cards. That's not a network. I'm talking about real relationships where you know
I
people
was
and
going to
you
ask.
socialize with
Yeah.
people and you know their wives' names and you know what they like to do outside of work. Those kind of
Right.
relationships, that's what builds a network.
Yeah, the old adage, and it's not that old, but the adage is, you go make these deals on the golf course, right? And so whether that's the gun range or over cocktails or at a play, having that real relationship where it's not, hey, I need something, so now I'm going to call on you. No, to your point, that deep relationship where you know what schools their kids are going to, and they know yours, they've been over your house for a barbecue, whatever. And I think because we do talk about, as you know, we do talk a lot about that network and how do you develop that network. And it sounds like that network played a large role in helping you transition. Was that network something that you worked on while you were in law enforcement, or did you retire and then you started working on that networking piece? That's something you built probably while you were in law enforcement, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's a work in progress. That's something
Mm,
you work on and continually nurture. As you would with any relationship, it needs nurturing. So it needs contact and interaction. And I would strive to get out to meetings and training programs and events where I could actually meet face to face with these people, shake their hands, and have, conversation over a drink or something to eat. That's what it takes. And to continue those relationships, and as you can imagine, as your network grows, it becomes a little bit more burdensome to try and continue that relationships because it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and it grows. And so it takes a lot of effort. It certainly does. But it's something that you would start on day one and continue with and never let it go, even after you found your dream job. The importance of continuing your network is invaluable, and I can't stress that enough to people. They sometimes let it go. They're in their dream job. They don't need it anymore. But no, I don't subscribe to that. You gotta keep that alive.
because it's about your brand, right? How much of your brand was associated with Steve, the prosecutor's office investigator, and when you're doing your transition, you don't have the prosecutor, label behind you anymore, and you became Steve, the fraud investigator, the CFE. I think that's really important. So we talk a lot about brand, obviously. How do you think about brand for our folks who have not yet transitioned? How should they be thinking about their personal brand, or how that is going to affect them? Is there anything there that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, everybody should be aware of and establish their personal brand, and it should obviously be in alignment with something that you're very passionate about doing. And as far as the investigations, I was always passionate about performing investigations. I was passionate about helping people. So in my networking, it's a give and take. They helped me and I helped them, and I enjoyed reciprocating when they came and called upon me to do things that would be of benefit to them in their investigations in the corporate world or in another law enforcement sector. So that's, again, can't stress that, and as important. It's as important as anything else you should be doing out there.
So the first role that you had out of law enforcement, how much did your network play with that? And if we're okay to share it, it was in the insurance side, right? As far as it being a fraud investigator there,
Yes,
and how much did your network play into that?
it played a tremendous amount. I was kind of cocky when I retired. I say, I look good on paper, and these kind of jobs that I'm interested, there's not going to be a problem getting these jobs.
Right.
So I went, I actually left. I left a job because I realized also that job hunting is a full-time job, and I left without having a job in
Yeah.
hand and thinking that I could easily transition. And a lot of the mistakes that I made that I now know of, applying to jobs online without making utilization of your network is really inefficient. So after months, and I applied to about 60 or 70 different open positions that were
Wow.
well within my wheelhouse online through job boards or company job postings without a single interview. And that was getting discouraging. 3 or 4 months had passed with that. And it wasn't until I started to really incorporate my network into this that I began to have success. In my very first job as a claims fraud investigator with a small insurance company here in New Jersey, was aided, and not secured, but aided with the help of my network. I probably wouldn't have. I don't know, but it helped a lot. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I sought to transition from that position into an opportunity with a much larger financial institution for a $40,000 increase in compensation, I again turned to my network to help me with that, and I was successful as well. I would say as largely a result of having that network and having that person endorsing you coming in. That's the way companies want to hire people.
And you got to let that process work. I think, you showed a level of patience there with that transition taking months. I too had kind of the same misplaced arrogance, like, oh, I'm going to be heavily desired as I'm transitioning from law enforcement, and this is the private sector stuff is easy, but it's not. It's different, and you got to learn what is their priority. So the fact that it took you a little bit of time and you had to continue to engage your network, but that's why you say continually work on yourself, continually work on your network.
The people
that led to your next role. Yeah.
The people that helped me with the first job, I knew that person for 30 years.
Wow.
30 years and never needed to engage them in any help until that time. Second person was someone I worked with, I knew probably for about 10 or 15 years. So you never know when that one person that you met 30 years ago may play a role in your future going forward. It's amazing, but that's the way life works.
And never lose contact with people. Yeah, I liken it to not burning bridges. I don't want to burn any bridges. I want to keep everybody around me that can be helpful, and that, because I want to be helpful to them too.
Exactly. And it's easy to say, well, that guy never calls me. I always have to call him. It's easy to say, I'm not going to call that guy anymore, but that's really not the way that I operate. And if I want to talk to that, Amos is responsible for maintaining that relationship. I take 100% responsibility for maintaining the relationship. I don't look at it as a 50-50 thing. When you own it in 100%, then you own it, and you live with the good of it and you live with the bad of it. So I would continue to reach out. Even if they never, they never reciprocate it often. That's just the way that it is sometimes. And they don't make a story about it.
Yeah, and I think being a good volunteer too in some of these professional associations or certification bodies, whether it be ASIS International or ACFE, holding a chapter vice president role or being the treasurer of your chapter, I think that's a good way to get your name out there too. Which a lot of people don't think about. They just think that these are get-togethers for people who used to work in the same agency together, and that's not so, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I belong to many organizations. I didn't hold the role of officers in probably any of them, but as you probably know from being in an organization, about 10 or 20% of the people do a majority of the work. So I was always in that 10%, whether it be setting up chairs or handing out flyers or making telephone calls. I was on the court and I was in the game. I wasn't in the stands on that. Yeah. So I didn't need to have the title. I could be as effective as being an active participant in organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a great place to pause, and we're going to talk about something else here in our next segment, so I'll tease it. You have your own business helping people transition. We're going to talk more about that. What I'll tell people watching at home is to like this and subscribe, keep following us. Both Steve and I will answer your questions if you put them down below, but we need your help to get this message out to as many of our partners as we can. Invite them to follow us and share this video with them, because we want to help them be successful and help you be successful in your transition. So stay tuned. We'll have more with Steve in just a second.
Thank you, Scott.